Imagine that even in the quietest moments of the night, when the world was almost completely silent, the Vikings' long journey would begin. No hurried orders, only the soft sound of the air and the sound of the water gently lapping against the shore. In the northern region, mornings always come slowly. The sky doesn't brighten suddenly. The light filters through the mist, and at those moments, the world where the Vikings lived would begin to awaken. On the shore, one of the huge ships stands. The ship's wood carries the dust of years. Its hull seems intertwined with the waves. This ship is more of a companion than a war machine. The Vikings don't hurry as they advance slowly. Each one knows how long the journey is, and they learn in time that the cold waters must be crossed patiently. This community was not only warriors, they were people who read the ocean, who sensed the direction of the wind, who knew the stars, and who traveled in silence. They sailed on open waters throughout the nights. The blue moon cast a soft light on the water. The waves didn't crash harshly against the ship. They only reminded them of their presence. These journeys didn't begin with loud shouting. They began in silence and continued in silence. Because for the Vikings, a journey was a long wait before an arrival. To be alone with the sea, to get lost in thought. Conversations on board were generally minimal. Every word was not spoken unless necessary. Silence stemmed not from fear, but from respect. Some journeys were for trade, some for war, some for plunder, and some were simply to see a new horizon. Everyone had one thing in common. Time flowed slowly. As the sun begins to appear on the horizon, the mist still lingers on the water. The light strikes the edges of the wooden ship, and the ship leaves the shore almost unnoticed. At that moment, the land left behind would silently bid them farewell. When a Viking ship left the shore, it moved on without leaving a trace. The water silently accepted the ship, as if it had experienced this journey many times before. The oars didn't strike the water harshly, gently, in harmony. Every movement was certainly a continuation of the previous one. Time worked differently on these voyages than it does with the time we know. Not even minutes were measured. No clocks were kept. The position of the sun, the direction of the wind, and the rhythm of the waves were enough for them. As the ship moved forward, the shore was left behind. The shadows of the trees disappeared in the mist. Even the houses became invisible, and only the water remained. The Vikings loved this moment, because the sea made everything equal. The strong and the weak, they were all on the same ship, adapting to the same rhythm. Some would sit on the edge of the ship watching the water. The shape of the waves changed, the light refracted on the water, and thoughts slowly drifted away. No one hurried during these journeys. The journey itself was as important as the destination, because every hour spent at sea gave one peace. The nights were long, the sky widened, the stars appeared brighter. The Vikings knew the stars. They knew which light guided the way. But sometimes just looking was enough. Not to travel, to relax. As the ship glided on the water, the wind gently filled the sail. The sail didn't tighten. It just swelled as if breathing. At these moments, conversations completely ceased. No one wanted to break the silence, because silence was part of the journey. The sea had a sound. It didn't shout, but a whispering sound prevailed. The Vikings loved to listen to this sound. The subtle differences between the waves, the change in the tone of the wind, the depth beneath the water, everything was felt, albeit slowly and subtly. Sometimes the fog completely enveloped the ship. Everything became invisible, but there was no fear, because fog is temporary. The sea was no longer just a surface. It began to behave like time itself. As the Viking ship moved forward, the movement of the water was felt more in the human body than in the eyes. The wood beneath their feet began to vibrate slightly. This vibration created a rhythm, a simple rhythm, similar to a heartbeat but slower. On these voyages, no one thought about the past. For them, there was no future either. Only the now existed. The Baltic seas are silent. But believe me, they are not empty. There is a depth within the silence. The wind sometimes completely dies down, the sails loosen, the ship almost comes to a standstill, but the sea still carries. The water would not let go of the ship. The Vikings knew this stillness. At these moments, there was no need to talk. There was no need to move. They simply stood there waiting. Waiting was one of the most important parts of this journey, because while waiting, thoughts slow down. The mind would begin to keep pace with the rhythm of the sea. For a Viking, silence was not an emptiness. On the contrary, silence was a rest for them. In the middle of the night, the sky would open up even more. The stars would multiply. Some would be reflected in the water, some would remain only above. At these moments, the sense of direction would disappear. But getting lost is not frightening, because getting lost is sometimes a relief. As the ship moved forward, the color of the sea would change. It would turn from dark blue to black, from black to gray. Each color represents a different moment in time. The oars would not be re-entered the water. Despite the light wind, the ship was still moving forward. This was something that pleased the Vikings, because control is entirely in nature. Man only adapts to nature. No one tried to be strong on these, because strength was meaningless in silence. Balance was key here. Managing balance, the waves don't grow, but they don't disappear either. Small waves hit the side of the ship. A soft sound is heard from then it disappears. This sound repeats, always in the same way. It continues at the same intervals. The mind notices these repetitions and slowly begins to relax. For the Vikings, these moments were sacred, but not in a religious sense, in a spiritual sense. Because a person couldn't hide themselves in this. They remained as they were. Later in the night, some would fall asleep, but this sleep is not very deep. Gentle and wavy. As the ship rocks, the human body, the line between dream and wakefulness thins. The sound of the sea acts like a lullaby. There is no anxiety, fear, or worry on these journeys, because fear craves noise, and there is no noise here. Just water, wind, and time. Sometimes the fog reappears, but this time it's familiar. The fog envelops the ship, the outside world disappears, the inner world becomes clearer. At these moments, the Vikings felt at home, because home isn't always on land. Sometimes home is at sea, moving. The ship moves forward, time expands, and the story pulls you deeper. It feels like this journey will never end. But this feeling doesn't bother you, because the goal isn't to arrive. The goal is to fall asleep peacefully in this silence, and you're still on the ship. The water is still flowing. As the night progresses, time becomes immeasurable. There is no time, there is no day. There is only a gentle progression in the darkness. As Viking ships glide gracefully across the sea, The difference between moving and standing still. The body is still on the ship, but the mind has already set sail. Conversations have long since ended on these journeys. Words have been There is no need for words anymore because the sea tells everything anyway. The color of the water is now almost pitch black, but this darkness was not threatening. It was calming, a way that lulls you to sleep. You will feel yourself there, and on this journey, each time the waves hit a ship, they make a sound, not a loud sound, not a quiet sound. The sound is like a soft touch, and each touch is more similar to the previous one. These repeating sounds slow down the mind. Thoughts stop lining up. Absolutely. They don't compete with each other. Everything becomes heavier, but this heaviness is not tiring. On the contrary, it is restful. When people close their eyes at these moments, they continue to see the sea, because the sea is no longer just outside. It has settled inland as well. Although the wind sometimes changes direction, it doesn't become harsh. The sail tightens slightly, but then loosens. These small changes but they don't create fear, because the ship knows its way and the sea knows it too. The sky gradually becomes more visible. The stars become more distinct. Some dim, some shine brightly, but none of them rush. The sky absolutely does not tolerate haste. The Vikings found their way by looking at the stars. But at these moments, direction is not important. What is important is being able to stay in the flow. As time goes on, bodies relax, shoulders droop, breaths become deeper. The ship sways gently with the waves. These sways create a rhythm, and the rhythm invites the body to sleep. Some close their eyes and fall asleep, but they don't sleep completely. They remain half asleep. This state is one of the most cautious states for the Vikings, because in this state, dreams are very quiet, images appear soft. The sea even seeps into dreams. The fog approaches again, but this time it is even thinner, even lighter. It's as if it has come not to envelop the ship, but to protect it. Sounds become even more muffled in the fog. Everything feels a little further away. This distance gives one a sense of security. For the natives of the Baltic Sea, these voyages are not a test, nor are they a display of ostentation. These voyages are a way of being in harmony with the world. You don't fight, you can't talk to the seas. You can only be with the seas. This understanding can be felt everywhere on the ship, in the trace of every oar, in the rope of every sail. The ship was no longer just a vehicle. It had become a space for them, and in this space, time doesn't stop, but it loses its speed and flow. The night stretches on, but it doesn't constrict. It doesn't suffocate. On the contrary, it creates space. The brain expands. Thoughts flatten. Silence now finds its true meaning. This silence is not an emptiness. On the contrary, it is full, and this fullness is the closest state to falling asleep. The ship is still moving. The sea is still carrying the ship. The night is still going on, and you are still in this journey. Continue without opening your eyes. It was now completely night. The sky and the sea had merged. The horizon was no longer visible. It had become difficult to distinguish where the sky ended and where the sea began. This uncertainty wasn't terrifying. On the contrary, it had a calming atmosphere. Because as the journey progresses, the mind also lets go. The Viking ships moved slowly through the darkness. Faint creaks could be heard from behind the planks. These sounds were regular, familiar. Each sound reminded one that the ship was alive. It didn't scream, but it whispered. The sea was now even calmer. The waves were small and gentle. They only touched the ship and receded. These touches were like a lullaby, repeating without disturbing. The Vikings moved very little at these moments. They did nothing unnecessary, because the night has its own order. This order cannot be interfered with. Some leaned against the edge of the ship, feeling the coldness of the wood. This didn't bother them. The cold didn't keep them awake. On the contrary, it calmed the body. Their breaths had slowed, deepened, and become more similar. No one could tell if anyone else was breathing because they were all in the same rhythm. The wind had almost completely died down. The sails hung loosely but didn't sway. This stillness caused time to increase. Moments stretched on. Seconds passed quickly. For the Vikings, this silence wasn't emptiness. This silence was rest itself. The last remaining thoughts in their minds slowly dissolved. An idea would come to them, but their ideas wouldn't take root. An image would appear, but it wouldn't become clear. Everything would remain incomplete. And this incompleteness gave them peace. The moon appeared in the sky, but this appearance wasn't bright. It was soft. The moonlight struck the sea. The water immediately absorbed this light. It didn't reflect it back. Everything flowed inward. The fog began to reappear. This time from lower, it moved along with the ship. It was like a travel companion. The sounds were fading even further. Even the sound of the waves felt like a lullaby from afar. This distance deepened the mind even more. The Vikings didn't think about destinations on these voyages. They sailed wherever there was something to plunder. The destination wasn't important at these moments. What mattered to them was being on the road, because the road cleanses the mind, weighs down the body, and the roads bring sleep. As the ship moved forward, time was left behind. Past thoughts dissolved, future thoughts didn't arise. They only had the present moment, and this present moment is very quiet, soft and long. The sea is still flowing. The ship is still gliding. The night is still going on, and you gliding through this silence. The night had deepened. Not only darkness, but silence had slowly spread. The sky and sea had completely merged. The horizon had disappeared. There was no longer a sense of direction, only a sense of flow. The Viking ships glided within this flow, progressing. This progress was felt, but the movement was not seen. The creaking sounds coming from between the planks were very faint. It was like a creak. Then, in a long void, a faint sound echoed like a breath. These sounds were countless. Their rhythm was immeasurable. It could only be felt. The ship was not moving on the water, but as if moving through time. The Vikings never spoke at these moments, because words are heavy, silence is light. Each one was drawn inward. The eyes were half closed, not to look, but to see the approaching dangers. The sound of the sea was no longer clear. The waves were not distinguishable individually, because everything had transformed into a single soft hum. This hum suppressed the thoughts within the mind, but this suppression wasn't forceful. It was gentle. When a thought arose, it would immediately vanish. Even though memories seemed to come, they wouldn't. As the ship moved forward, time expanded. Hours didn't pass, but rather stretched on. The concept of time lost its meaning. The Vikings didn't keep track of time, because on these journeys, measured time would disturb their peace. The moon seemed to stand still in the sky. Its light neither increased nor decreased. It simply existed. This light wasn't a sharp light. It didn't disturb the eyes. It didn't awaken the mind. The moonlight fell on the water, but the reflection wasn't clear. There were no waves to reflect. Everything was blurry. But this blurriness didn't bother them. On the contrary, it gave them a sense of security. The fog enveloped the ship. It only softened certain details. It lost its sharp lines. The edges faded. This fading also blurred the edges of the mind. The Vikings perhaps didn't sleep on these voyages, but they weren't exactly awake either. They were somewhere in between, in a semi-awake state. There is a fine line between thought and dream. On that fine line, breaths deepen. Chests rise and fall slowly. Even this movement becomes almost invisible. The ship seemed to adapt to it doesn't sway, but it doesn't shake. The sea didn't carry them, it only allowed them. This state of allowing makes everything easier. The last remaining tensions in the mind are resolved. There are no thoughts left to cling to. There is no longer a need to do anything. There is no desire to arrive anywhere. Just existing is enough. The Vikings' silent voyages may seem simple from the outside, but the real journey takes place within. There is no conquest, no victory, no gain whatsoever, only an emptying. The mind slowly becoming lighter, the body feeling its weight, the eyelids becoming heavy on their own, everything flows naturally. The ships continue to move forward, but this progress is not towards a destination, but towards the depths. The night was still not over. The sea still remained silent. Time is just beginning to dissolve, and you are within this dissolution. As the night drew to a close, the darkness began to shift. It wasn't fully bright, but it was losing its darkness. The sky was still night, but there was a very slight opening within it. This wasn't something noticeable. It was more of a feeling. The Viking ship continued on its way. But it wasn't just moving forward anymore. It was approaching somewhere. This place wasn't a shore nor a harbor. Sometimes it was just a feeling of completion. The fog was slowly thinning, but it wasn't completely dispersing, but it wasn't as dense as before either. As the moonlight began to appear more clearly on the water, the reflections were still soft. There was no sharpness. This softness takes away the last hardness of the mind. The Vikings knew these moments very well. This transition, not from night to morning, but from movement to stillness, no one spoke. But everyone felt the same thing. The journey was no longer arduous. There was no longer any waiting. It was simply the flow of time. The sound of the sea was becoming a little clearer, but it didn't rise high. It only reminded us of its presence. The waves could now be counted, but no one counted them, because numbers were meaningless on this journey. The mind, for the first time in a long time, seemed completely empty. But this emptiness was not disturbing. On the contrary, it was reliable. Thoughts never got lost in this emptiness. They simply weren't needed. Memories no longer came alive. The thought of the future didn't form. Only that moment remained, and for the Vikings these moments were considered sacred. But it wasn't a showy sacredness. A quiet, simple, weighty. Many voyages had been made. Many seas had been crossed, but these silent journeys were the deepest. Because it is in silence that a person withdraws into themselves most. The ship was now rocking less. The sea is almost perfectly flat. Even the water seems weary, as if it wants to rest in the water. The sky begins to lighten, but the colors still belong to the night. Blue, gray, and pale hues. These tones do not tire the eyes. They do not awaken the mind. On the contrary, they give a final feeling of relief. This was not the end of the journey, but it was its completion. The silent journeys of the Vikings were never said to be over. They were only said to have settled in place. Everything pauses where it should. Breaths were now deeper, slower, quieter. Bodies grew heavier along with the ship. The mind calmed down along with the water. The route no longer matters. North, south, east, west, they all lose their meaning. The inner direction is no longer necessary. This silent journey is not to reach a destination, but to distance oneself from oneself. And as you move further away, rest becomes possible. The night is now giving way to light. The sea is still silent. The ship is still moving forward, and everything is clearer, simpler, lighter. Now the journey carries you, not the other way around. And this feeling of being carried is the closest thing to sleep. Now the journey is almost over, because from this point on, moving forward and standing still are the same thing. The Viking ship is still on the sea, but it is now difficult to notice. It is as if it has become a part of the sea. The water flows silently. The waves are immeasurably slow. Each movement felt lighter than the last. The sky is turning a pale blue, neither completely dark nor completely light. It is exactly in between. This is where sleep begins. Breathing is no longer conceivable. The eyelids are heavy, but not up. Weight is safe. Weight is letting go. The Vikings knew these moments, the quietest hours of the night. The hours when no one can speak, no one can think. The fire is almost extinguished, but there is no cold. Only a warm night remained. The mind no longer asks questions. It does not seek answers. It simply rests. The rhythm of the sea slows. The rhythm of the heart also slows down. Each breath was a little deeper, a little softer. Time is no longer measured. Minutes become blurred. Moments stretch on. There is no destination on this journey, because rest is not a destination. It is only a state of rest, and you are right now in that state. If thoughts come to your mind, there is no need to talk to them. You don't have to follow them either. Let them come and go in a corner of your mind, like the mists passing over the sea. Whether the ship is moving forward or it doesn't matter anymore. There is only calmness. Just silence. Shh. This silence is not empty. Protective, conservative, soft, reliable. Sleep is approaching. Don't rush. It's not calling you. It's not forcing you. It's just leaving the door open. And you, come in if you want. Your eyes closed, your breath deep, your body heavy but comfortable. The sea doesn't let you go. You don't need to think anymore. You don't even need to listen. Just rest. And if you feel sleepy, don't stop it. Let it take you to the land of dreams.